Paul, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I am very excited to be back in Austin, and it's going to be a really fun time.
That's right. You're bringing the How Did This Get Made podcast back to Austin for a second time on March 25th at ACL Live at the Moody Theater. A movie has been decided. We'll talk about all of that in just a sec, but I didn't need to know that the podcast had been here previously because, in thinking about the first time I ever saw you perform or make people laugh, myself included, would have had to do with South by Southwest. We just crossed the threshold of another South by Southwest a few weeks back. And the first time I saw you had to have been nearly 20 years ago when you and your human giant mates performed at some random bar on 6th Street. It was you, Rob Hubel, Aziz Ansari. I feel like Eugene Merman was there too. Do you have any recollection of this?
I actually do. I believe it was Eugene Merman and John Glazer, who you might know from like Adult Swim shows like Delocated and stuff like that. He's on that show Running Point right now. Yeah, we were just launching our first seasons. I remember we went down there. We had DVDs in hand. That's how long ago it was. You know, we were passing out DVDs to people on the street, doing venues, just trying to get the word out about the show. And South by since then has just been like my favorite place to go. I also just think it's because Austin's such a great place to go. You know, there are certain things that I look forward to every year, like a Comic-Con, but now I feel like South by, and that was a time when South by was great because the music festival was so rich and awesome. And then it would kind of segue into this movie part, you know, and when I went there originally, before Human Giant, before anything, with a movie called Blackball, the Bobby Duke story, is a paintball movie. We won the audience award at South by, and that like legitimized a lot of our careers, and people like got behind it because it was like a Christopher Guest style improv movie that I think you know, not many places would take as seriously as South by. So going back there year after year, last year we were just there with The Gutter, which just premiered on Hulu this year. So that gives you a sense on how long it takes for these things to come around. But it's a blast because I think culturally people are just get it, and the food's amazing, and I can't beat it.
I just realized as you were saying that you and I spoke on the red carpet last year prior to the premiere of The Gutter. And of all the great movies that were at South by a year ago, that was one that really caught my attention because everybody was talking about how this sort of comedy doesn't get made anymore. Paul Reiser, who's obviously a comedic legend, and discussing with him how he ended up a part of this project, he said he read the script and he was just flabbergasted that something like this could still be made. And now it is on Hulu. And guess what? It exceeded the lofty expectations there. And I feel like it has helped set the table for a sort of comeback in terms of really good comedies in the world of cinema.
You know, we're trying. I think that the thing is comedy, sense of humor is such a subjective thing, right? So what you find funny and what I find funny may not always line up. And a lot of times, and as we get more and more people out there sharing their opinions, you can kind of review bomb a comedy by accident. I don't understand the review bombing of like people are like, oh, they shouldn't have a girl in Star Wars, whatever. But that's a different kind of review bombing. This is sort of like, it's not funny, this grand statement that sometimes happens with big, bold comedy. And I think that you know, you never get that with a drama. You know, people are like, it wasn't dramatic enough. I didn't cry enough, you know. But I do think that if we can make these things cheaply, if we can make them fun, there should be a flavor for everybody. I mean, I love Tim Robinson. I think you should leave on Netflix, you know, and I love Abbott. They're incredibly different shows, but they're both so good and they are just representative of a broad swath of comedy.
When I love how Tim Robinson is really evolving that character now too, with the new movie coming out called Friendship, co-starring Paul Rudd, where he's still playing that same character, but instead of it getting a sort of slapsticky response from the people around him, he's hanging out with these group of guys, being this complete weirdo, and they're like, "Hold on a second, there's something very off with this dude." And so to have him basically take that to a completely different place, but to still get a sort of enjoyment out of it is a really cool thing to watch.
Yeah, well, Andrew DeYoung directed that, and it's just a great group of people. I think he wrote it as well. I'll tell you this much. I have a theory. It's a new theory. I came up with it on Unspooled, the podcast I do with Amy Nicholson, who's the LA Times film critic, that Paul Rudd is the reason why we have an explosion in comedy. I go back to Anchorman and 40-Year-Old Virgin, right? These are movies that are big, bold comedies, and the studio feels comfortable with those movies with a bunch of unknowns by putting Paul Rudd in there because he's sexy. He's cool, right? He was in Clueless. What they don't realize is that Paul Rudd is a Trojan horse. Yes, he is sexy. He's a good-looking guy. He's a great actor, but he's also just as funny as everybody else. And when you look back on the last 20 years, Paul Rudd has been on every level involved in the movement of comedy. I think that people use him as a tool because he gets it. He's so good. And I want to, like, if I was in college, I would write a paper about Paul Rudd and the comedy explosion. And for 20 years, from 40-Year-Old Virgin in 2005 to now, this guy has, very rarely misfires and works with everybody from like David Wayne in The State, back in the day from like Wet Hot American Summer, all the way to, like you're saying, Tim Robinson and Jenna Ortega.
Yeah, well, speaking of Jenna Ortega, she was part of a cast that Paul Rudd is a part of with Death of a Unicorn. It was at South by a
Yeah.
few weeks ago. It looks like a hilarious film. You talk to everybody on the red carpet. It seems like they all really got along and are fully behind this project, where it's Paul and his daughter, played by Jenna, hit a unicorn, kill the unicorn, roundabout series of events. Other unicorns come to Earth seeking vengeance. And you talk to Paul on the red carpet, he's just got this everyman quality to him, even though he's this worldwide superstar. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I'm not recalling if you have done anything with Paul before. Have you guys taken part in any films together? Actually, now that I say that, I realize Wet Hot American Summer, the prequel.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We've done a bunch of things. It's so funny because I can't even articulate or isolate what they are. I can tell you that the one thing that jumps to the top of my head right now is Adam Scott and I worked on a show on Adult Swim. We made a show called The Greatest History in the Greatest Television Event Ever, or where basically we remade TV theme song opening. So like Simon and Simon and Too Close for Comfort and all these bosom buddies. And Paul was in those. I was on Party Down, which Paul has been involved. Like, there's so many paths that have crossed just because it's just our community, right? We have a community of people and we all are working in different ways and looking out and fans of each other.
Wait a second. Everybody always talks about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Is there a 6 degrees of Paul Scheer in the world of comedy?
Oh my gosh. I was going to say, I thought you were going to say Paul, the other Paul, Paul Rudd.
I know I had to go with the misdirect there.
But yeah, I would think, at one point there was an article online that was written where I had tentacles into pretty much everything. At a certain point, maybe now that's changing a little bit, but I do believe that I can connect to a lot of people, as anyone can, really. It's like we have to work harder now to do comedy because you got to get people's attention wherever you can. If it's a podcast, if it's a YouTube series, if it's a movie, because things just don't work traditionally the way that they used to work. Where we don't go to the movies because it just, when I was a kid, we just went to the movies on Friday. It didn't matter what was out. Now we can be more selective. We go like, wait, when is that going to actually come out on home video? Because I'll just watch it at home. And so, or home video, that even dates me. I'm just saying streaming. But yeah, so it to me, it's a sort of like, yeah, we all are kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, and I'm assuming things come a little bit easier for you in 2025 in terms of getting the word out there on a project than, say, when you brought Human Giant to South by Southwest nearly 20 years ago. But do you miss that grind at all? That guerrilla style marketing that comes with being a fresh face in entertainment, trying to get people to notice you for the very first time?
Trey, let me tell you, it's not changed. It hasn't changed a damn bit, right? Because here's the thing. Attention spans are shorter. You got to get in front of people's faces. I remember that, we've been doing How Did This Get Made, this podcast that we're bringing to Austin, for 15 years. A long, long time before people even knew what a podcast was. People were like, how do I get a podcast? Be like, okay, go in the App Store, download the podcast app, then search right here. So, but I remember we were doing that show for ages, a couple years, and somebody was like, oh my God, Paul and Jason were on a TV show together. And I was like, wow, like, this is a fan of the show. They've been listening for years and didn't know that Jason and I were on the league for 7 years together, right? So you always have to get out there. You can't take for granted. I'm not Taylor Swift. And you have to figure out ways to get to people, whether it's like I have a new video series called Dark Web with Rob Hubel. And it's like, oh, we had a clip that just hit 1 million views like in 2 days on Instagram, right? And it's sort of like, it's great. It's a billboard for our show. We're just trying to again, continually get the word out just so people know. Where I think the difference is now I at least have some doors open. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get a check behind that door, but at least I can get into those rooms. There's a little bit of, I think good work begets good work. Now we just have to get the people who own these big streamers to let that mean something to them. In a world where they're killing movies like Coyote versus Acme and Batgirl and stuff like that. It's very hard to convince people, back to your original comment, like that something is funny. Like what's funny to them is not necessarily funny to somebody else, and it takes so much energy to push through and get a show like a Tim Robinson show on the air.
Paul, I love your passion for cinema, and it's expressed through a couple of different podcasts that you're a part of, including How Did This Get Made, which is doing a live taping at ACL Live at the Moody Theater on March 25th. And the premise for the podcast is you, your wife June, your buddy Jason that you just mentioned. You talk about really bad slash B movies and kind of what makes them unintentionally great. And the selection for tomorrow at ACL Live is Craven the Hunter. Now, I vaguely remember this film. I never saw it, admittedly, but what is the process like for how y'all go about deciding which movies you're going to talk about on this show?
Well, first of all, let me say this movie came out less than 6 months ago.
Oh, is that right? I felt like it was years ago.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. This is a freshie, but it feels like it may have come out in 1997. We have an amazing producer. Her name is Avril Halley, and she scours at multiple movies to find the selections for our show because it's a very specific process with our show to figure out a movie that is actually fun to watch, and not just I want to like poke out my eyeballs. So she does a lot of that work for us, and we have a shorthand now because we've been working together for years and years, where she really knows what we like and how we like to work.
So, for people who are watching or listening to this conversation right now, who are interested in going and checking out the live taping of How Did This Get Made at ACL Live at the Moody Theater on Tuesday, March 25th, maybe they're not that familiar with what it is that y'all do. What exactly is this show all about? What can they expect if they attend tomorrow night?
Well, what I love about this is whether or not you know how did this get made or not, you are in for a big comedy show, right? This show, and if you've not listened to the podcast, is a bunch of friends having fun talking about a bad movie. Now, if you've seen the movie before, that's great, but we'll play plenty of clips. We will make sure that you are part of the conversation, and that's actually one of the best parts of our show. We are all stage performers. We're comedians. We just don't want to sit in chairs and do a show. We want to make the audience a part of the show. We think of this as a one-time only event, right? No one else is getting Craven live in their city. We're going on a tour for the next 2 weeks, but no one will get this show. And as a matter of fact, the show that's going to be released to everybody for everyone to hear in a couple weeks will be an edited down version of the show. We normally cut about 45 minutes or more out of the show because we want to keep the show that feels like it's a secret. We had something here. It's a unique moment. I love Taylor Swift. I saw that concert. I thought that was amazing. But if you see her in 3 different cities, you're probably going to see the same show with the exception of like one different song on that piano. What we get here is the audience is different. People come up, they sing songs. We go to the audience to ask questions about the movie. People come in costumes. And there's something really cool about the fact that you have an entire audience that has all been through this trauma. We've all seen Craven, and we all need to decompress about it. So this is really like a therapy session for people who have seen a really bad movie. And I think very rarely do we get that. Sometimes it's just like a bunch of friends hanging out at a house talking like, oh my God, can you believe this? You got over 1,000 people feeling that same exact way.
Do you, June, and Jason ever talk about a really bad film that any of you have been in?
Look, this is a question that comes up a lot, and I think it's tricky because we are working actors, directors, writers, producers. Are there things that I'm more proud of than others? Absolutely. But when it's yours and you've been in it, you gotta kind of you have a love for it. You know the director, you know the writer, there's a connection to it, right? We still love these movies. We come at it from a place of love, not like screw this person, I hate that. We understand what it takes to make a movie, but it's way harder to say, "Oh, this sucked," because we know the people involved. It's it's like going over and like you're watching your kid's friend play baseball and be like, "Oh man, your kid sucks." You can't do that. But if you watch a really terrible little league game, be like, "Well, these guys are." I mean, I don't know why I'm saying we're making fun of kids' sports. We're never. I don't know who finds making fun of kids' sports, but you know what I'm saying. It's like this idea of just. I think that it's just harder to look inward sometimes like this.
I'm the father of a 10 and 8-year old, and I coach some of their youth sports teams. There's a lot to make fun of in the world of youth sports, Paul.
Oh, I have a 10 and an 8-year old. They are in soccer, they are in basketball, they are in tennis. I am a coach, I'm a ref, and yeah, I mean, but you can't reveal that. Every kid is great, every kid's doing a good job.
Wait a second, you coach and ref, and occasionally you're just an innocent bystander watching your kids play sports?
Uh-huh, 100%. Yeah, I we have AYSO out here, so that's like that organization for soccer. The it's a great organization. I love them. But yeah, so I am coaching this year 10U and before I used to coach my son who is in like 6U and 8U and my wife would coach the 10U and I would when she would coach I would ref. And now I am refing the season, but when I'm not coaching, I'm refing. And yeah, for basketball, it's a club team, so it's a different vibe. But yeah, I'm there. I got my coach's bag. I'm coming out there. Got my whistles.
Do you enjoy coaching or refing more?
I love refing because there's a sense of power there that is just awesome. Like, because from I'm a huge sports fan. Love watching basketball. And what I hate about basketball is when the ref is just on that whistle all the time. Like, let's let people play. Let's play the game, right? We don't have to call everything. These are kids. There's no real stakes to it. So I like to keep a game moving, running. Obviously, we're going to call if the ball's out. We're going to call if there's handballs. I'm going to call the egregious stuff, but I want them to play. I want them to play, and I don't want to stop the clock every couple of minutes. So I like that power of just moving the game, keeping the kids on the field, keeping the energy up. And I also feel like when you're with kids, it's like it's keeping the vibes up too. You never want to see people get decimated. Like I always teach my kids when I'm a ref or when I'm a coach, I'm like, if we're up by 4, hold back. Let's not. We don't need to crush, right? And I feel like it's a demoralizing thing when you're on the other side of it. And so you try to teach these like good lessons to the kids and get them on board. So I think it's a great, not to make it too much of a serious answer, but I think it's a great learning moment for these kids. Like that's the job out there is make it fun, make them want to come back and teach them how to be just a good sport in life. Because chances are they're not going to be playing professional sports, but they will have to work together with people for the rest of their lives.
Youth sports is invaluable for teaching life lessons, much more so than teaching any sort of skill set for that sport. And look, it does teach you how to get better at a sport, but that happens through perseverance. You start out not great at something, you have to work hard to get better. And it helps kids understand the value of teamwork and being a part of a bigger group and learning how to win, how to lose, and also learning that sometimes life isn't fair. Things aren't always called fairly. It's not necessarily intentional. That's just the way it goes sometimes. But it sounds like you as a ref are only calling traveling a slight bit more than how the NBA does it.
It's just like that's the thing. It's like you like the other part of this too is you got to let them play, right? That's what they want to do. Kids want to play. And I think it's important to remember that that's at the core of this entire thing. It is just playing and it's organized playing and it's all this sort of stuff. But you gotta like it, you have to instill these lessons because when the kids are loose, they play better. When they're tight and they're nervous about making a mistake or not getting, I said I was doing goalie training last night and I said, the kids are like, what's the number one thing that you have to remember about being a goalie? And everyone's like, oh, don't let a ball in, use your whole body. And I was like, yeah, those are fine. But the number one rule you have to know is the ball is gonna go in. You're not gonna get right? Like you gotta the baseline is you're gonna get goals scored on you. right? So the minute you just understand that that is part of it, then you can approach doing the rest of it. Because like you look at these kids, I've watched them have mental breakdowns when a goal goes in. It's like, no, 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 it's fine. You gotta like let the take the pressure off so they can actually perform to a higher level. I'm a big believer in that, and I've seen some kids blossom because of that, because they're not being held to a level of excellence, and they actually achieve a level of excellence because they're not thinking about it.
That pregame anxiety is a fascinating topic. As a matter of fact, it's something that came up for one of the teams I was coaching recently. It was my son's youth basketball team, and we were in the playoffs and we were about to play for a championship. And before the game, I asked everybody, I said, who's nervous right now? Nobody put their hand up. And then I raised my hand and said, guys, I'm nervous right now. And I'm not even playing in the game. So I want to ask you one more time, who's nervous right now? Every hand shot up. And
Yes.
so I had to explain to them in that moment, look, the nerves aren't a bad thing. People try and shy away from stuff that's hard or stuff that makes them nervous because they're worried about the outcome. Being nervous means that you care. And once you get out there and start doing your thing, all the nerves are going to melt away and you're going to do what you're best at, what you're here for. And that's to have fun playing basketball and hopefully win this game as well. And sure enough, they went out there, they won the championship. And after the game, I told them, look, always remember what we talked about with regards to anxiety and nervousness before something. It means that you care. And assuming that you prepared yourself properly, you're going to be up for that moment for the rest of your lives.
I agree with you 100%. I get that feeling when I walk out on stage every single time. It's just this moment of, all right, we're doing, here we go, right? It's like it's it's such a it's like you are entering into, you're performing, whether you're playing sports, whether you're acting on stage, whether you're doing stand-up comedy, whatever you are, you have to like, it's a switch. You're turning a switch and you should be nervous. And I think that that's a great thing. Like you care. And, when I coach my son's basketball team, it's like, you get so passionate there and there's only so much that you can do. I've watched some great coaches um, coach so minimally. And that's also really interesting to me too. It's like let them use their instincts, let them go. There's one girl that we had on our team. She was very good, a great player, but she found it not to be a challenge to be on a girls' team. She wanted to be on a boys' team, right? So we put her on a boys' team, and I gotta say, our team was very receptive to her. But I felt like they never really wanted to pass to her, right? And it was like this thing, and it's like, how do you curb that out of them? And it was interesting though because we saw it right away, and we were able to just be like and to kind of funnel the passes, and then all of a sudden she makes them look good. And then all of a sudden everyone wants to do it, right? Like, but and I think you're right. Like it's learning all these rules about also like don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge there's no preconceived notions. It's like we're all here to do the same thing and win and play together. I love it. I really have become such a fan of organized sports, considering I didn't really play organized sports when I grew up.
Oh, no kidding. You didn't play any organized sports as
Yeah.
a kid.
No, I was an only child. My parents worked their asses off and were never home at any time to get me to a spot. And it was sort of like, I just kind of missed the bus on that. I liked sports, but my parents aren't really even into sports. So it wasn't really like a household discussion or a thing that we did. My dad and I would watch basketball games. We'd go to basketball games, but it was, actually very excited because we were go see St. John's, who now is in the NCAA March Madness here, which is, I mean, the first time in like in 25 years. I feel like it's wild.
So that's youth sports at its best. Youth sports at its worst is when the adults are acting like children. Sometimes it is the parents, sometimes it is the refs, but it bothers me the most when it's other coaches. Paul, I have numerous examples that I've seen recently of coaches on other teams, which are typically a parent of one of the kids, blatantly cheating or trying to bend the rules in a way that it gives their team an advantage to help them win that game. And it's like, guys, come on now. Like, at your best, you're getting away with something because not everybody understands the nuance of the rules. But at your worst, the kids realize what it is that you're doing, and they think it's okay to cheat. And Paul, we don't need any more cheaters in this world than what already exists.
Oh my gosh. You asked me like what I like being a ref, and I should have led with my first instinct, which is I love being a ref because I can control some of these parents and coaches. I am the de facto person. I've kicked a coach off the field, right? There's a thing with AYSO where you have to have a certain amount of players in the field. So 7 players in the field. Now, sometimes what happens is one team has 5. And you go, hey, I'll throw a penny on my kid. I'll give them to you, and we'll play this game, right? It's much more rec. It's not club. It's right. And and you want to make sure it's balanced. And I played this one as a ref one time. This one team, they had 7. The other team had 5, and they're like, we want to do 7-on-5. And I was like, well, it's not really fair. Like, let's just split it up. He's like, no, I'm not going to split it up. And I was like, well, why don't you rotate out 5? No, I'm not going to do it. It's in the rule book. It's in the rule book. And it's like, right, in the rule book, it says, like, we got to play with what we have. Like the Dallas Mavericks the other night they couldn't sub out anybody because they had no other players, right? What fun is that to play 7 kids on 5 kids? Like, what lesson are we teaching there? And there are people that just don't know, and they don't know, and it just pisses me off. It's like, it's about the kids. And I said it earlier, but you want these kids to want to come back. They want to come back. You want them to come back next season. You want them to come back. You want them to have a good time, whether they are the star of the team or a kid that doesn't play that well. You want to have them feel good about themselves. And sometimes these coaches and these parents can get so vindictive and nasty, and it's like it's just for fun. I want to win. I want to play hard. I want to have good practices, but it is just for fun. It's for the kids. It's not for us.
Paul, I would regret not asking you about something that you did last year. It was a memoir called Joyful Recollections of Trauma. Obviously, writing a memoir, writing something personal like that requires a sort of vulnerability. Just how difficult was it for you? And at the end of the day, just how fulfilling was it for you to not only write the book, but also all of the really positive things that have been said about it since it came out?
Yeah, Joyful Recollections of Trauma, is kind of a joke name in a way because there's been all these books, with a very sad face in the cover, and I understood like, a lot of memoirs are about these traumatic events, and I look at my traumatic events with a level of joy. It's kind of this thing that's happened over the course of How Did This Get Made, where I would tell these stories very happily and look over at Jason and June, and they'd be like, "Whoa, wait, what happened?" And I didn't really understand like the gravity to these moments because I was just a kid and I didn't know any bit better. And so when I sat down to write the book, I really did think I would just write on that level, like fun little anecdotes, and we'll see what happens. But I realized writing a book, you got to go a little bit deeper. You have to have something a little bit more of an emotional core there. So what started off, you know, more in the sense of not a parody, but more a lighter version of a book, became a lot more deep and went into, growing up and being a parent and falling in love and kind of correcting patterns that happened when I was a kid. But throughout the entire time, I was very cognizant of going, my number one job is an entertainer. Oh, that sounds terrible to say. My job is to be fun, to make it enjoyable. Like I want to make this a conversation that we're having, not a conversation where I'm trauma dumping or, bumming you out. So yeah, there are some serious things in there, but I try to make sure that every chapter, every piece of it is a constant flow, a fun flow. And I've been just blown away by it. Emotionally, it was a really interesting experience to kind of dive in and write it. I always say it's the book isn't therapy, but it's a reflection of therapy, which so I'm able to like look at it as much more of a story than like let me tell you my first person narrative while I'm going through it because I think those are a little bit messy. And I was so happy that I got named like Book of the Year by Vulture and Booklist, and we were a finalist for the best audio book of the year. So yeah, really happy with it, and I love the experience of doing it.
Does it make you want to write another one?
It does. I think very similarly to what you said earlier, it's a slog. It's a slog. I love the writing. It's the getting it out there and selling it, which is, that is something that I absolutely loved. And whenever I would go out and do any of these events, it was something I brought my whole heart into. But it's tricky. What I guess I realized in this process was, wow, people don't read as much as I read, or are just getting books. Like there are plenty of people who read, there are plenty of people who are, but it's like it's a different medium. Like when I was a kid, like I said, I'm going to the movies on Fridays. I'm when my parents would go to the mall, I'd hang out in the bookstore. I'd go to Barnes and Noble, I'd grab a bunch of books, right? It's just a different culture right now. So yes, I would love to write more. I still write on my Substack. It's just making sure that I'm not just doing it for a check, which is the same reason why I wrote this first book. I wrote 100 pages before I even submitted it to anybody because I wanted to make sure there was some there. And I feel like uh, when when you do something like this, you want to make sure that you're giving it your all. So yeah, I still feel like I'm in it. The paperback is coming out in May, and I just added 25 pages to it, which I thought was a fun little bonus.
Oh, interesting. I would love to have you on again to have a conversation more centered around the book if you're up for it. All right, last question now, Paul. You just mentioned it. You get to entertain people for a living, you get to make people laugh for a living. I love laughing, whether it's stand up comedy or a good TV show or a good movie. And that's something that you've gotten really good at over time. What do you love about getting to entertain and make people laugh for a living?
You know, I wish I was more reflective, but I think that I just love my job. I love getting to perform with funny people. I love getting to create. I don't know any other way. I found this very early, and I never took anything else seriously. So, I feel very much like this is the only thing that I know. It brings me so much joy. It never feels like work. So all those things that are hard about this career, they might bum you out, but I look and I go, man, I just love that, I can create my own path. I can get out there. I can do this stuff. And I do think that, especially with comedy, um, we are providing, and I don't want to be too gross about this, but an important service for people wherever they are. I talked to so many people during the pandemic who said like, "Oh my gosh, your podcast got me through." I've talked to people who told me these stories about terrible moments in their life, whether it's like a parent dying or going through a divorce. Feel like, oh, your podcast was there, right? And there's, I have this, like I said, this show, The Dark Web, I do with Rob Hubel. We do the thing, and people are like, this makes me laugh. I look forward to this every Thursday. It's like there is something about being there for people that I'll never know. I never know the scope. Every now and then I get to hear a story like that, a personal story. And that to me means the absolute world. And I take it for granted. I don't think about that. I'm not like, I go out there, do a good show for Maria today, I love that it can be that way because I know that when I'm feeling that way, there are things that I turn to, whether it's music, whether it's, things I'm reading, what movies I watch that make me feel good, that those people, you know, make it all better. I mean, look, the Clippers, for the most part, I love that team, basketball team. They make me feel good, And I was like, what would I ever? I thought about this last night. I was like, what would I ever say to Kawhi Leonard? Like, I love watching you play. That seems weird. I don't know, but it is. These people, they articulate an emotion or they help you get through something. I think it's very important.
He is Paul Scheer. Check him out along with his wife June and Jason on their podcast, How Did This Get Made? Doing it on Tuesday, March 25th at ACL Live at the Moody Theater.
A Tuesday night. Come out on a Tuesday. I know. I realized as you said it, I was like, oh, wow, we're doing a Tuesday show? Yeah, I guess we are. So Tuesday night is the new Friday night, I guess.
Never a bad night to go out and watch people making you laugh in this great city. Craven the Hunter is the movie. Snag tickets, those that remain at acllive.com. Paul, thank you so much for the time today. Really enjoyed this conversation, especially the youth sports coaching and refereeing parts. I would love to have you back on again in a couple months when the book comes out in paperback. In the meantime, safe travels and best of luck with things.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.